My name is Hunter Lovins. I've been asked to be the steward of COPx. COPx is the brainchild of a very senior UN official who recognized that the UN Conference of Parties, the annual exercise in frustration, were never going to solve the climate crisis. So suggested that what was needed is a global movement of people solving the climate crisis from the bottom up. And since he can't do that, still being a very senior UN official, he asked if I would take this on, and I'm honored to be giving it a go. A number of the people here are part of our core group. We meet weekly and try to figure this out. So Darlene and Paul and Jarrett and uh, several others of us. Søren was one of the people who helped kick this off at the very beginning of it, and then subsequently went and got a real job. And we are truly honored today to have Dr. Drea Burbank, who is the what co-founder and co-director of Savimbo, and is currently, as she just told me, in the Darien Gap in what would that be, Central America, working in one of the biodiversity hotspots. We also have Paul Rowland of Environment Next. Drea and I will have a conversation for a while, as long as it's interesting. And then Paul will moderate a conversation with all of us. So start thinking through what questions you might have, what comments you might have. Our attitude in COPx is that if any of us were any damn good, we'd have solved these problems. So the wisdom that all of you bring is truly needed. And figuring out how to solve these problems is the job of all of us. So, Drea, why are you in the Darien Gap, and what do you hope to achieve there?
It was as big a surprise to me as anybody else. I swear to God, this is the funniest F pick I've ever done. I got a phone call and they said, "Get your butt into the Darien Gap." And I was like, "Why?" And they were like, "We're having an F pick." And I was like, "Okay, I'll go." And then they signed they signed an ACTA, like a legal contract that for us to negotiate for them. And I was surprised as hell. And I said, they actually had a stockade, so they actually have this stock thing where they put you in it. And I thought maybe I was going to end up in the stocks. I didn't know what was going to happen. And then it turned out that we were we were welcome to have a new partnership. So then I was like, okay, great. And I said, look, guys, I don't have any money. And they said, you'll figure it out. So yeah, it was like a reverse epic. Although it's very legal and formal, I've been checking it up one side and down the other. I'm terrified. I feel like when you get your hero's journey call, you should answer the phone, but at the same time, I feel very overmatched for this negotiating job.
You are not overmatched. Drea, in a
Uh,
past life, was a firefighter. She's a medical doctor. Go online and Google Dr. Drea Burbank and prepare to be impressed. I know I certainly have been. Drea, why you said we? Who is we? Who is Savimba?
well, Savimbo started with we were a genius consulting firm who cleaned up in Hollywood during COVID. We figured out how to get a test result back in 6 hours, and it was taking them 6 days at the time. So they hired everybody in Hollywood hired us for like a week. And we got some cash and we were like, what do we do with our money? So I was on vacation in the Amazon and Johnny and Fernando found me and they kicked me in the shins and they said, you think you're so smart and you're a genius. Why haven't we gotten paid for conservation in 20 years? And I was like, I don't know, but I'm so smart and I'll figure it out. And then I was like totally destroyed by this question for like a couple of years. It was really a tough to hack this. And so we figured out how to do a biodiversity credit, first certified biodiversity credit in the world. It looks like it might be. I always tell people if you hear the word credit, think small contract. So like the carbon credit was written in the U.S. This is the small contract that was written from a hut in the Amazon. So it's pretty fun. And then the Darien Gap heard about it and they seem to like it a lot. So that's what we're doing.
What is a biodiversity credit for those who might not have heard of this term before? And we've
Yeah.
heard of
Okay.
carbon credits and bank credits, but what's a biodiversity credit?
So I'm going to try and go meta a little bit, like the planet Earth is a cell. And so it's three-dimensional, and ecosystems are at least six dimensions, but I like to work with three because those are the real chords. So carbon, biodiversity, and water. Just like when you're describing a multidimensional object, you use orthogonal dimensions. So like we describe ecology or ecosystems using multidimensional logic. So you could have carbon and not biodiversity. You could have biodiversity, not carbon, and the same goes for water. And I'll give you an example. Vietnam has empty forests, so great carbon, no biodiversity, they've overhunted. And then eucalyptus plantations in Brazil, where they plant great carbon, once again, but negative water tables and negative biodiversity. Um, and so that's kind of like the logic for why you would do a unidimensional measurement in biodiversity. So we're measuring like X on this ecosystem or in other ones that we work in, and we're really good at the X dimension, for instance, the biodiversity one. And we use indigenous hunter-gatherers, and they usually find rare species. So like, the theory is if you find a panda in the forest, that forest has to be pretty good. Thank you very much. Give me my biodiversity credit. And that logic has held up on international negotiations. And so that's why I'm here in the Darien Gap. So we think they'll be better at measuring their own biodiversity than anybody else would. And we have a way for them to do that, which is very cost effective.
Wow. Once you have a credit, what do you do with it?
So it's a tangible metric. It has to be, it's like we always tell them it's like mango versus tree. So it's like a mango falls off the tree every month. And we're not selling their tree, so they keep all their rights and assets, but they produce a biodiversity credit every month that they can show that the ecosystem is intact. So it's like each as they go, they prove that the ecosystem is still intact this month, they get another credit. And the credit is 1 hectare per month of full integrity. So if you find a harpy eagle or a jaguar, then you can claim you have full integrity. If you can only find like a tapir, you can only get a partial credit if that.
Wow. How do you monetize it?
Very carefully. So we released an international instrument to, it's the first time in human history that biodiversity has OTC traded like oil.
Wow.
That was the geniuses. That was the geniuses backing Johnny and Fernando. They really helped us out. So we got it to OTC trading. A lot of people put money into petroleum simply because it's a nice, cute little market. Like it trades, there's grades, there's commodities. You can buy it, flip it, sell it, retire, So we figured if we could do the same thing with biodiversity, people would put money into biodiversity. Why not? They're just playing with the market. They're not necessarily, and there was $100 million allocated from petroleum to biodiversity simply for that use case. Like, can we trade biodiversity instead? Love it. Let's do it.
And then where does the money go?
For us, 50% gross goes right to the community, like the collective. And then out of our side, we pay all costs, like all costs. They should not have any money out of pocket. They're paid salaries from day one. And then we pay 90% local staff. So we hire them to out of our costs. And that's how it works. We're hoping to get that number down. So we're hoping to get our number less than 50% gross, but we're going to need to automate a bit more first.
So this is what makes it a high integrity credit.
Hopefully. I really wanted to. I was like, you know what? I really studied carbon and I was like, okay, all these scandals. I was like, is this about the carbon credit or is this about your business practices? And I saw a very significant percentage that was about business practices. And then there was another part that was about core science. Like a lot of carbon is doing ex ante modeling. And if you take out that out and you do ex post modeling, that takes out a bunch of crap. So I was like, I think we could do better. And we had a chance to with the biodiversity credits. So we only do ex post sales, no more modeling. We're really big on gross revenue share, things like that.
There are, of course, some carbon credits that work on roughly the same basis. The work of SECEM, SEKEM in Egypt, which is both a biodiversity credit and a carbon credit, is enabling smallholder farmers in Egypt to make the transition to entirely organic biodynamic farming, substitute out solar irrigation pumps for diesel pumps, plant trees, and then dramatically increase the local biodiversity. And in that case, 80% of the gross goes to the smallholder farmers. But then Sechem has six other industries. It sort of has its own high integrity business model. Uh, are you familiar with the work of Grupo Ecologico in Querétaro State in Mexico?
Actually have heard of them and I talked to them. Um, it's always kind of a thing if you're gonna do bundling, so you're gonna sell it as a holistic thing, or you're gonna separate it. We separate it dimensionally for a number of different arguments, but mostly because to reduce complexity and also to diversify markets. So for instance, where I'm at in the Darien Gap, they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket with both carbon and biodiversity. So they split it. They go like one project developer for biodiversity, the other one for carbon. I love X Post. I'm a huge fan of Cambridge for carbon. So Cambridge has the PAC framework, which is X Post carbon modeling, and I'm a big fan. So we actually are working on that behind the scenes for our next thing. And I'll share this agroforestry protocol that we just wrote. It's with Yale, so and it's basically like how to plug all this stuff together. So I'm like obsessed with this right now. Like how do we plug this together like Lego blocks? You could do like one thing or the other, but most importantly, the plug is working. So we've been working on the plug all last year.
That's very cool. What the folk in Egypt did was to work with Heliopolis University and do all of the measurement and reporting and verification, the MRV, and then worked with the Egyptian stock market and the Egyptian Financial Regulatory Authority to ensure that the flows of money were verified and that the money really was going where they said it was going. In their case, they sell these credits on the voluntary market to companies primarily in Europe that are offsetting the carbon emissions that they can't otherwise eliminate through renewables and efficiency. And it seems to me that if you're a company with integrity and you set about trying to be responsible to a climate safe future, the first thing you will do is implement a lot of efficiency. It, for many years, has been far and away the cheapest. Then implement renewables. This is now shifting, by the way. Big scale efficiency is actually slightly more expensive now than big scale renewables, which is somewhat interesting. But you do everything you can to reduce your emissions, then offset those that you can't reduce. And for companies that are doing this, to me, this is the responsible way to be doing business in a time of global climate crisis. What is the analogy in the biodiversity world?
Oh, I mean, like, so the exact building blocks, we first off, I totally agree. You should do yes and. Like you should be doing your best to compensate for impact and reducing impact at the same time. And I do not believe it can ever be an either or. We have a lot of restoration to do. The in biodiversity, the building blocks I use is ecological benefits framework that came out of Google and Ocean Sustainable Fishing and organic farmers, and then also regenerative agriculture nerds. And they all agreed on the same 6 dimensions, which we will see. You can see in corporate reporting. So the idea was to move ESG reporting over to EBF reporting. So you're doing your reporting in a tangible term. You're not doing a crazy corporate report that nobody can read but Claude. You are saying what you did for soil. And we can already see this, like the highest in corporate reporting, like Apple, they're giving their corporate report and what do we do for water, soil, air, water, biodiversity. I don't think it's important that you necessarily know what you're doing. I think that you can be humble and say that we are figuring this out in X, but you cannot say that, you cannot just not speak about it. Like we have nothing to say about biodiversity. Everybody on the planet is impacting biodiversity. So even if they just say biodiversity, we have done X small little thing. I talked to Dr. Bronner's and I really love them. They are so smart. And talking to them and a couple other corporates, like I talked to Lush as well. And they are so humble, proactive. They're getting stuff done. They are prototyping things. They don't pretend like they know what they're doing. And those are the best on our planet. And if you talk to them, they will be very clear that they don't have it all figured out. The thing is, they're just trying. They're not sitting around at Davos doing some crazy corporate report with really pretty pictures. If you talk to the people who are actually the best, they are really stumped about hard problems. And that's a great place to be friends.
Yeah, that was the attitude taken by Ray Anderson, who was the visionary CEO of Interface Carpets, who back in the 90s realized there is nothing sustainable about my business. He was buying a company in Europe, and the employees said, "What's your environmental policy?" He said, "Do we have one?" And quick, somebody get me a book on the environment. Somebody gave him a copy of Paul Hawken's book, Ecology of Commerce, which said, among other things, business is the driver of most environmental damage on the planet, and business is the only institution big enough, well enough managed, resourceful enough to be able to solve these problems. And Ray read the book the night before he was to give the speech, described it as a spear in his chest. He said, "There's nothing about us that's sustainable." And he said, "We are going to be the first company of the next industrial revolution." Called Paul, said, "I've no idea how to do this. Are there others like you out there?" Paul and Ray put together a dream team that a number of us served on for many years. And we literally co-created everything about Interface's commitment to behaving responsibly to people and planet. And I was sitting with Ray in 2001, and he was annoyed. He said, "This isn't why I was doing this, but everything that I'm doing for sustainability is enhancing every aspect of shareholder value." And I said, "Interesting. What do you count as shareholder value?" And he listed 7 items. We've since gone through and listed out 13 different reasons why behaving responsibly is just better business. No polar bears required. And we call it the integrated bottom line. And now, in these times when companies are green hushing and backing off of corporate commitments and trying to pretend that the only thing they care about is Milton Friedman, highest return to least investment, thinking through why behaving responsibly is in your business interest is a useful corporate exercise to do. Now, to what extent in biodiversity are you finding similar sorts of things?
I think it's so similar. If you look at, I love, so businesses that I love are IKEA, Trader Joe's, and REA. Those are just 3 examples of just like really with it businesses. They're not expensive businesses. Like they're not selling a luxury good. They're selling a useful item that's relatively responsible and is well thought out and is designed. They're taking their effort and putting it into design. And I think that that's the business of the future. That's what it's going to look like. It's not going to be really hard. But it's going to have this attitude of bricolage. One thing I see a lot in biodiversity, and a lot of the biggest issue I see about, so this is kind of like our religion. It's a hodgepodge of like high-end research at Stanford, startups, things like that. So we're like iteration, prototyping. We borrowed shitty first draft from Stanford. We used to write their research papers with them. So like just get a shitty first draft out, work from there. We borrowed bricolage from India, actually, like put it together the easiest way you can in India, which is totally syncs with LATAM. And then we just measure what matters from Google and the culture code, which is like a brilliant way. So like basically just get in there, get your hands dirty, do your best, be humble, learn as you go kind of attitude. And then I'm seeing that in biodiversity. The biggest fail I see in biodiversity right now is too many people in biodiversity are designing it from the city. So I grew up off the grid in central Idaho, hunting and fishing, and that's how Johnny grew up in Fernando. And we're never going to say the same thing about biodiversity that somebody who lives in Silicon Valley or has an AI company will say. And I would say 90% of the people working in biodiversity right now are trying to develop kind of like an already failed deep tech. Like they were in AI, they fail out. They were in AI in carbon, they fell out. Now they're in AI in biodiversity. And so it's not really the best tech. The best tech is like species now from Google DeepMind for biodiversity, which is free. And it's also not necessary. So like, our guys just do game camera in the jungle and they're doing it with a perception of growing up in nature. So my recommendation is if you want to measure what matters in biodiversity, ask somebody who lives with biodiversity. Don't ask somebody who lives in the city.
You mentioned earlier the Rio Trio. Uh, Almost everybody has heard about UN Framework Convention on Climate Change on climate. There is also the CBD, Convention on Biodiversity. There is also the Convention on Preventing Land Degradation. Uh, do you guys interact with that one at all? The CCD?
Yeah, we try and plug into it. We actually have a water credit coming out because you protect one area through biodiversity and you're stacking, right? And so you could do water credits. And we have 3 sites. We have about 100 sites around the world. 3 sites could qualify for a water credit either because their biochar is soaking up mercury in the ground. They have mercury to fix, or they're dealing with flooding or something. It's a side effect of where they're planting. So, and we did launch an experimental water credits thesis to World Economic Forum. The same way that we produce the biodiversity unit, the same protocol to produce it could be used to produce the water credit, and we're just debating that with some mangrove guys right now. Like we would work backwards. We would use all of our special stuff, shady first draft, prototyping, and do the water credit, and then just make sure it plugged in and interoperated well.
Describe where you are. People who have ever heard of the Darien Gap have only heard of it in terms of refugees struggling north. What's it like?
So it's the land bridge between North and South America, and I would argue that it has intense geopolitical pressure, which it's an indigenous zone, so it's been indigenous for 5,000 years, maybe, and mostly Embera, some Hunan, some nomadic groups through. So we work with the Embera down in Colombia. It's pretty wild, savage, like jungle area, very high biodiversity. It's a biodiversity hotspot, and then you have basically two with the Panama Canal, which is just north of it, you have the US and China battling it out for geopolitics, and then Panama trying to reassert its independence. And arguably, all those players have been there for about a lot longer than the current scandals. And then you also have illegal economies going across the land bridge. So, whether that's humans or illegal activities. And then we have just kind of on a day-to-day basis, harpy eagles and jaguars all over the territory. The indigenous communities here have had a long-term reputation for saying no to everything, which is a really good strategy if you're an indigenous community. A lot of the communities in Canada and the US just say no to everything. Doesn't matter how good it is or who you are, just no, 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 no. And that's actually a really good in game theory. That's a great strategy. So they've kind of been doing that for a long time, and we have permission to get funding on a community by community basis. So that's what we're going to be doing, and I'm really concerned right now about water filters, toilets, electric canoes. Like we want to earn trust. So I when we look at permission, a yes isn't a yes. It's the beginning of a yes, and then you have to have yes every month for it to still be a yes. You can't even just say yes once. And so you're kind of like always ranting. So I'm trying to earn my continued yes. And I think we're going to start with water filters and electric canoes is the right way to keep getting an S. So yes.
Paul, you've worked with the canoes of the Marshall Islands. Environment Next funds these solar canoes in the South Pacific. Is there any uh, bringing these two together?
Well, I think it's really interesting culturally because the canoe is actually an emblem, both culturally and, of course, essential transportation for groups around the world, particularly indigenous groups. And Canoes of the Marshall Islands started out as a cultural organization trying to rebuild knowledge of how to build traditional canoes. And if you know the Marshall Islands, of course, is a large archipelago, and it's massive in terms of area, but it's all composed of coral atolls that are maximum 3 meters above sea level. And so canoes over time have been, and they navigate historically, they navigate without any equipment or charts. They have charts made out of string, which are really, I don't know how they work, but they're fascinating. And they navigate across vast stretches of sea to, with some precision and end up at these, tiny atolls, which could be easily missed. So they have built now a prototype of a solar powered catamaran, which as the canoes were displaced by, 18-foot fiberglass skiffs with outboard motors. Obviously, life has become different and less sustainable. So they're paying well, and that was before before all of this that's happening in the Gulf. They were paying $16 a gallon for gasoline for outboard motors. This is the fishing communities, and so a solar powered catamaran gives a couple of advantages. One, of course, it doesn't require gasoline, and secondly, because of the catamaran between the two hulls, they have storage for the fish. So that doesn't require refrigeration over the time where they are, catching more fish and transporting it to market. Um, so I think it's an interesting thread through time, and I'd love to be able to connect some of this. But the electric canoes, I'd love to hear about those as well.
I've been in deep nerd mode. I called my friend who worked with Tesla and some friends from Apple and stuff, and I was like, okay, tell me the whole thing. Like, give me the current skinny because I see such old solar tech down here. So I wasn't sure if I was getting the best. And we were like obsessed with the ratio of like how much area you could put out there to get solar versus the canoe moving through the water. And it looks like you couldn't put the solar panels on the canoe. Some people are doing that, but for basic physics, it doesn't sound like it makes sense. You'd want to put a charging station on every town. So then now I'm obsessed with components, like getting it down here and importing it across logistics and then pitching it around to funders. Cause I was like, it'd be so much fun to make this little solar powered like canoe charging station and each little community gets one. But the reason I want to do it is because it makes me so mad that petroleum guys come down here and they hold a meeting to try and drill on these areas. And I've seen this in Brazil, Ecuador, Panama, everywhere. So they have a meeting, and for everybody to get to the meeting to say yes or no, it's about $10,000 in diesel. And the petroleum companies go to the meeting and they're like, "Hey, free gas for life if you say yes." And it's like a not even like a tiny little bit of money on what they're pulling out of there in crude, and they're actually shipping it in. So if they're not actually generating it on site, they're shipping it in from a refinery, but they know because people have to go pay for the gas to get to the meeting that they have a pretty good value prop there. And it's the biggest expense for these communities. So I was like, if we can hack the solar problem, it's a very like pound for pound, it's one of the least expensive ways to stop exploratory drilling in these areas. So and
Wow.
I'm always thinking about how to do things more efficiently. So
I love the politics of that.
yeah. I told everybody that at COP30. I said, if you guys want to stop exploratory drilling, just pay for a solar panel. Like they will automatically say no if you solve their transport problems.
Right.
So
Um, Wow, that's great. Hunter, did you have any more questions, or should we open up for
I was going to ask Jarrett to talk a bit about the work he's done with keeping standing forest standing and Red Plus.
Sure. Hi, everybody. If you don't mind, just to because I had some questions on the biodiversity credits. Can we start there?
Sure.
Sure. Uh, Nice to meet you, Dre. And this has all been
Nice to
fascinating.
meet you too.
Just so I work with Paul at Environment Next, but prior to Environment Next being what it is now, we were carbonfund.org, and we're also a Red Project developer at Carbon Co. So we developed four of the pioneer projects in the rainforest of Acre. Like, I'm not sure if you heard of them, but like Envira, Purus, Russus, Valparaiso. Um, my only question, like, I come from the commercial side of the market, and I'm just curious on the biodiversity credits. First off, with the OTC market, like, what are you seeing in terms of pricing, and how do you, I guess I'll just ask a few questions and let you go on it. One is, these are in no particular order, but how are you pricing these credits? And because that's got to be a little bit challenging if there's not really a market that exists for it. The second question was, how do you kind of determine baselines and something that's kind of like regionally unique and things along those lines? And the third question is like, as a go-to-market strategy, what kind of challenges are you facing? Because for me, I always found the one, I don't want to call it easy, but the easier part of the carbon credits was that I was filling in for, direct emission reductions for a corporate, whether it be a customer program or for that type of thing. But how do you look at if this market expands and your projects expand, how do you look at really I mean, you're one of the pioneers. We're going to be building a market for this space. So I just wanted to get some of your thoughts there.
I'm so grateful that you ask all this stuff right now because this is all I think about right now. It's my job and nobody else seems to care but me. The people who built the carbon market were 20 years ago and they're all like, yeah, whatever, we're retired now. They're not really interested. And then a lot of people are not interested in biodiversity because the carbon's already done or whatever. So, yes, okay. Wow, deep nerd. First off, certified first gave us direct access to commodities exchanges. First OTC trading in human history for biodiversity in November. We went for a concentrated market launch. We could launch on a number of different international exchanges with our current certifier, which is ICROA Corsea certified, Cerro Carbono out of the Global South. And then we went for a novel instrument. So it's pure biodiversity, stacks on carbon instead of a bundle one, which you'll see coming out of different areas. We're hosting the market launch on MSurge. They moved a significant amount of carbon and they have a long history as far as OTC traders. They're an automated brokerage. For price discovery, we are averaging about $30 per hectare per year. We just pinned it with the first public offtake. I am really obsessed with the time. The problem with one of the problems with carbon as a market was it never time standardized. And I'll send you a Stanford paper for that. But essentially, we by happy serendipity, we time standardize the biodiversity from the beginning. So it's 1 month. It's not the project length; it's the unit length. So if your project is a year to credit, then you get 12 units. But essentially, we have standardized time, and I'm very curious to see. Because now we have a natural experiment between carbon and biodiversity. If that solves some of the trading problems, there's an argument that carbon should have been should have been better time bound as an instrument. Did I answer that? I've got more. I can keep going.
Yeah, no, great. Keep going. Sure.
Okay. So I'm obsessed with, we need to do our first enterprise purchase. We have a lot of interest from traders, but until we do the first large enterprise purchase and with media. So currently our beachhead market is small business, and they mostly seem to be purchasing for very interesting reasons. So they're doing it for credibility, brand identity. A lot of them are serving it to their consumers. There's a strong signal from Gen Z. Nobody can sell to Gen Z. Gen Z are weird as hell. They're so weird. They go to your website 6 times before purchasing. They look at your about page. They read your actual corporate sustainability report. Like, who does that? Gen Z does that. So there's a lot of interest from people trying to serve the credit, like selling a mattress to Gen Z. We added biodiversity credit. It might reduce some of the costs, but I don't have any clear pipeline experiments for that yet. The Fortune 100's want a case study. I don't have somebody with a Fortune 500 with a clear case study. And then the other thing that we're seeing is people are buying because it's low risk. So if I buy carbon and I do a bad job of it, I can be sued. If I buy biodiversity and I do a bad job of it, I get all the benefits of having a credible claim for the climate, but I'm not liable. And so there is a segment of purchasers, like enterprises, who want to experiment, want to do an ex post credit because it's greenwashing proof, want to use it for growth, but don't want the liability risk of carbon. Is that adding
The
up?
only thing to say, yeah, that's good. I'm just a couple of thoughts there. One, offline, I'm happy to tell you we had a very successful small business program so I could kind of explain to you what we did there. The other part on the suit part though, I would think, I mean, I didn't really see, I mean, I'm sure with the way the market's going now, like, but I haven't really seen many lawsuits. You could contract that out of a carbon credit sale. I mean, if you have a verified credit and the standard has a buffer, just based on the VERPA, I think you could avoid. I mean, people could sue for whatever, but I don't think they'd have much room to stand on if they're getting a verifiable credit transferred in a registry account. Um,
Yeah, we're seeing some slap lawsuits mostly in the US. But
hmm,
like green hushing, it's not necessarily the number of slap lawsuits, it's the fear of slap lawsuits, right? And so this
right,
does
right,
open
right.
people up, and where we're working, most of the indigenous communities won't accept carbon. And so we're actually protecting the same forests for much more cost effectively. It's not like we're stacking one over the other. We're
Hmm,
actually just reaching areas that are under significant threat but won't take a carbon project.
gotcha. Thank you. And I guess the last one was the baseline scenario.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so there is fundamental differences between biodiversity and carbon. They are not the same thing. Carbon is an inorganic element, right? You can go from bad to good to bad. So you can go atmospheric back down to the ground. Biodiversity can't go from dead to alive. So you need a pool of structured biodiversity, like an intact pool of all the different ecological niches filled by native species in order for it to work. So it's one way to pay areas like Gabon and Suriname, or sorry, Suriname and Gabon will never get money for they're carbon negative countries, but because they aren't under threat and they haven't deforested, they aren't going to get carbon credits. But biodiversity is one way to reward them that's
Mhm.
reasonable. Like it's within basic science.
Gotcha. And are there expensive, like, what are the verification costs and things like that for biodiversity credits? Maybe like the
It
whole
depends on the
project cycle.
protocol. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
we have negotiated a unit, which by the way is our big hack, is we figured out the unit, which was actually a lot tougher than it looked. It was not as hard as people were making it, but it was not as simple as it could have been, and we had to get some pretty good people on it. The unit unlocked the market, which then allowed us to do different kinds of protocols like avoided loss, impact, whatever. We're doing a conservation protocol, which is faster to market and easier to certify. But a restoration protocol might be a little bit more expensive. We are looking at a restoration and agroforestry would probably involve eDNA. Unknown costs right now to us. We've been working on that all year.
Gotcha. Oh, great answers. Thank
Thanks. I can nerd on this all day.
you.
I hope that wasn't too fast for regular humans.
Well, we'll give you the opportunity to nerd some more. I wanted to sort of at this point open it up. We've got uh, basically 15 minutes to the top of the hour. We got another quarter hour after that in terms of schedule. But I wanted to open it up to folks. And for those who are not familiar with this current version of Zoom, if you want to put your hand up for to ask a question or make a comment, go to the heart, the react button, and if you click on that, there's up at the top, there's a place where you can raise your hand to indicate your interest in chatting. And just reminding everybody to keep everybody's done a really great job of this so far, but keeping their microphones muted until then. But once you go to speak, remember to unmute. So, do I have anybody interested in asking a question at this point from? Because if not, I was going to throw to Jared again to ask about the in terms of carbon markets, that there's been a number of changes and adaptations over time, particularly when you look at some of the methodologies that are changing, and particularly when you look at RED and RED plus. Jared, did you have any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
sure. I guess one question before we start, like I can look quickly on the screen. Are there carbon professionals in the room? It's just how I kind of angle this is besides the speakers. Okay. Well, if anyone has chime in there, but I give you a little background. So we, as Environment Next, as I was saying, we used to be carbonfund.org Foundation. And we also had a subsidiary called Carbon Co., which was one of the pioneer red developers in the space. And maybe by just giving you a little background on what we did, we kind of help give you an overview of the market since we're kind of leading the market in Brazil at that time in the state of Acre. But the reason we got into this originally was so carbon has always been, even from the early days, I've been in carbon since like 2007. And from the early days that I came into it, it's always been about, some sort of compliance scheme and just having natural buyers. Because there's nothing better than being able to issue a credit and then have, a set price in the market and a buyer at that time, in so jumping ahead, I was one of the early employees at Carbon Fund, but I moved on to Cantor Fitzgerald, where we're developing CDM projects, and that's Clean Development Mechanisms, part of like the UNFCCC program. But in that situation was great because we had projects from all around the world, all project types, not Red Plus, even though that framework was developed amongst that whole group, so to speak. But in that type of the market, we had natural buyers where the credits would issue. I'd call basically like three financials that I was in touch with, give the spot price at the time. And, if the project wanted to take it, then we would transact that. So when we got into the international space for avoiding deforestation, there was an MOU between the state of California and the state of Acre and Chiapas, Mexico. And this MOU was supposed to, California was creating an emerging emissions trading market, which is now off and running and everything like that based on allowances and like a kind of a cap and trade system there. But these were going to be the state of Acre were going to have the first projects that were going to go into that compliance scheme, which meant natural buy side, which meant we could basically, as a small organization, set the framework and the background to create, really create signals across the market to have develop projects all around the world in the Red Plus space. But as anyone who's told you in carbon, it's a long, slow, and often annoying process. And that MOU never came to fruition in terms of a market. And so with that, we had four projects in Brazil. One of them, total 750,000 acres. And Vera was our largest, which was like, three-fourths of that. And we were issuing millions of credits a year from Envira, maybe like 150,000 or so from the other projects, and had no buy side. And people didn't even really know what red was at that point. And the whole point of these projects were to basically they were not indigenous communities. They were private land properties, which in some ways were beneficial in the sense of and just the paperwork and the messiness that could come out of that in terms of that type of thing. But at the same time, they had two components to them. One was the verified carbon standard, which was the emission reductions that existed in there. The other did carry a biodiversity aspect of it, and it was listed more as a stamp of climate, community, and biodiversity standard. So when we came into this, so we were building schools, health clinics, providing dentistry, giving, small plots of land title to the community members in exchange for basically reducing slash and burn agriculture. And one project, there was planned, not to get too complicated, but Envira was a planned project. These other projects are considered unplanned, meaning like they were slash and burn and they were building a road to Peru. And then people were just tearing down forests and that type of thing. Whereas Envira, they were doing cattle ranching professionally and all that and decided they're going to, mitigate that to do the deforestation. But so that was the space of it. And we got lucky early on. I mean, it was tough. I mean, I was the whole salesperson for that whole unit. And I got it took a year and a half to sell the first credit. And the first one, we got lucky in the sense that we were able to get it through BP Target Neutral at the time, was able to be the buyer and we offset the FIFA World Cup in Brazil at the time. And that was that really got us going. We were able to get two projects off the ground, be able to fund those, and Envira hadn't issued yet. And then, we got into the realm of just like, corporate sales. The carbon back in that time, just to give some perspective, there were no heads of sustainability in 2007, 2008, 2009. A lot of that, like my first sales that came in the market were coming from marketing agencies who were calling up and, Madison Avenue, that type of thing, saying, hey, hey, listen, one was like a Nikon program was we're going to paint a camera green and could you offset those emissions, and there was a spree of that from like 2007 to 2008. All the while we're hoping for a US cap and trade program. This is in like the Obama McCain period, and that was going to really, that was the high hope. That never came to fruition as well. I mean, Obama decided to focus on healthcare, which is fine, but it just didn't pull that in. So there started to build, as this was going on, there started to be little regional markets occurring, like Reggie in the East and Western Climate Initiative, things along those lines there. But there was no real buy side for red. And then we had some early action corporates. So it's been basically as Dre was saying, with the people who are retiring in the space and that, it's been a long, rocky road for forever. And what I would say about we had some corporate sales originally. JetBlue was a major buyer, and Microsoft when they were still purchasing Red, Virgin America, that all carried over. But it was really just like a hodgepodge of pulling together deals and then working through to going out to the wholesalers in Europe and groups like that who could buy large volumes. I always saw it as how does one guy in Vermont sell a ton of credits? Well, tie into companies that have 30 salespeople, and things like that. But what I'd say in that process, so, and then over the time, we've gotten a lot of hits, and I'm sure you've heard about this and that and controversy and practices that come from carbon. One thing I feel a little, I agree with Dre on, but I also feel there's another attribute to it was the idea that it's, the companies that were causing because of poor business practices. I mean, that was the case in situations. I'm not sure if people saw like, Kariba, which was South Pole's largest project, and, some of the scandals that went on there. But these projects were few and far between. And most of the issues that occurred in the markets at that time came because, in the recent days, were really just baseline issues. And in the sense of like projects used to be in carbon where you would go in and measure trees on your own at your project site and try to use local data to create a baseline. And for those of you that don't know what a baseline means, I mean, you're basically trying to figure out what the baseline scenario would be of business unusual if there was no more if you didn't come in with a project to mitigate this deforestation. And so that was an evolving process. And I think the reports that came out, from John Oliver kind of started that downturn on carbon and the controversy with that one piece. And then it went out. It was amazing that one kind of comic show where went into this one writer from The Guardian who was just destroying our market. And what I'll say in terms of carbon in the space is when you have what I find, and I know I'm going in all directions here because I'm trying to get 20 years into a second, but like, when it comes to carbon projects and criticism and things along those lines, what I've seen over the years in the space is if you have a corporate or some polluter or a group like that doing things, there's always room for error and that type of stuff. Like, and there's like criticism, something might go bad, but at the same time, people give room for them to go as they're learning and exploring. It's interesting to me that in these climate contexts, like especially carbon, it's always been that the new criticisms that occurred are really about looking back in a market that was a lessons learned project. These are very complicated projects. I mean, you're going in the developing world, you're working with these communities and landowners and these certification standards that are evolving and growing in the process, and then trying to find levels of, saying, well, this one thing was wrong, the baseline was off and this and that. And then people are, as Dre was saying, like the green hushing and that type of thing that's occurred. Corporates used to be thrilled to take our projects. Like when JetBlue would do our programs, they would lead with our Envira project and then put all their stuff after it and like really tote it out there in the airports on their flight, monitors when you're on the plane, on the TVs and things like that. And that really carried the market for a while with these corporates. And it was a shame that when one person's articles came out, named a few corporates, not only did the green hush occur, but really the buy side, we had periods right after COVID where the market finally started making sense, because going back a bit, the other thing is to finance these projects. It's expensive and there's a lot going on. And some of these big corporates that were, toting, all they were doing for the environment benefit, at the same time, they were coming back to projects and saying, listen, I got some broker who's going to sell me credits for a quarter of the price. What could you do there? And there wasn't much demand in the market. So a lot of these projects over the first 20 years had to deal with both, communities, landowners, the whole gamut of people who thought they were going to get a certain price point and had that all listed in the project finance, and then are coming back with like very, very minimal price points for these credits. And the other aspect that people need to understand about credits is it's not like a stock where you could buy an Apple stock and just hold it and that the stock value goes up for a long time. They're based on vintage years, and vintage years go down in price. So like, we have, right, just for a comparable, I could sell probably like a 2020 red credit for, ideally like $7, something like that, and then if you have a 2016 vintage, you're talking about a quarter right now, so it wasn't like they could hold these credits for a better price, and so going down the line, then we had a peak period around 2020 or so where all of a sudden everything was coming together. Like red was great, carbon was great. We're finally getting like $12, $15 price points for these credits. Everything's coming together. And for people who have been at it for 20 years, it was like finally that moment in time, only to literally crash in a second when the Guardian came out with 3 articles, all complaining about baseline scenarios. And it basically just dried up the market in that time. And it was terrible because it really hurt and killed a lot of projects there. So that's now we're still at that point. But the one thing to say is most of those criticisms that came out were about the baseline scenario. And that was something that, for a developer, all we've ever done is verify these projects to these top NGO standards like Vera, Climate Action Reserve, American Carbon Registry. They provided the rules, they provided the frameworks, and we would verify to those. And those groups, they, if anyone was full of integrity, at the most part, it was the standards at that level. But it was lessons learned, and they were already moving into the methodology for Red Plus used to be 0007, and now they're moving into VM48 and jurisdictional red. But that stuff was all in progress, and it just really hurt things. So that's just to give you a
Yeah.
perspective. That's what carbon has been for a very long time. And I think that if people look at carbon and understand, no one in the carbon markets has ever said carbon should be the whole way. I mean, our motto at Carbon Fund was reduce what you can, offset what you can't. And the idea with the carbon process is that carbon itself is a tool. One tool in the toolbox in terms of how to create decarbonization and these emission reductions. And as none of this is so clean and easy as sometimes they try to lay out on paper. Like when your corporate's trying to go through a decarbonization journey, they can only reduce so much at so much time. And then there are aspects of the operation, say like, maybe they could reduce their business travel, but they need to business travel, or they need to do X, Y, Z. And being able to use carbon credits there is one of the best tools out there for, just a selection of choosing good projects and not letting some of the bad actors out there, who most of the time, those bad actors, I think, were just based on lesson learned in older scenarios. But so in the last point to get to on the red journey, and I'm happy to answer any questions, is where it's moving now is pretty interesting because for the whole time that I did this for these projects in Brazil, this was really project level Red Plus, meaning that the baselines and the projects themselves were all done at our project level, hoping to get help from the state with no real national programs going on. But the way it's moving to now is there's a coalition called Art and Architecture and for trees, and trees is the carbon standard. And trees is making jurisdictional level where the baselines now are going to be based on the jurisdiction itself, which also alleviates a bunch of problems, such as like leakage, where there were concerns, well, if you avoid deforestation here, what does it get pushed over to this area on a private project? So that's taken away, and setting better baselines and using tech and AI and all that kind of stuff to move it forward. So I think what we're going to see going forward now is there's still questions on how to nest it, meaning how do we bring project level projects into these jurisdictional schemes? And everything's very new at this point. It's kind of attached to the Paris Agreement and something called Article 6, which is a webinar of itself. But I think that we're going to see going forward really strong red programs, and hopefully they'll allow these project level projects into this program and nest it in so that we could have a much, and everything that was done these last 20 years in carbon, I would say, has not, because when I look back on it and I think like, well, this and that and everything's changing. The thing I'm proud of in looking over this is we really even though it was messy, we all built a lot of, everyone in this space, we built a lot of infrastructure, and the things that are going on now, like jurisdictional red and things along that nature, would never have existed without the lessons learned and the pain and all that kind of stuff that we all went through. But if I leave you with one thing, it's to be that when you see in the paper anything about, carbon or red plus and everything like that, just remember that these are reporters with an angle trying to say a thing, but 99% of the people I know in the space are really came into it for the right reasons and are trying to do the right thing, dealing in a very complicated environment. And so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. I think it was also, I mean, one of the things that really affected the markets was the dangling of compliance markets that kept happening,
Right.
but that never were really realized, because that, of course, would have been a game changer in the sector. Drea, I wanted to ask you, I saw there were a couple of questions for you in the chat that you have answered fairly comprehensively. But for those who are not able to read the chat, maybe they're doing this on the phone, maybe you have like a verbal answer in particular to Tiffany's question about carbon and biodiversity markets and how they, what's happening on the ground for the communities you work with.
Yeah, I'll just say, so Savimbo has I would argue it's an ethics panel. I'm allowed to officially say they are our friends of 400 Indigenous leaders in 45 countries and 100 Indigenous nations. That's a lot of leaders that have very strong opinions about carbon. So, regardless of kind of the no harm, no foul early market stuff that I can see with my, like I'm from the US and I get it ahead, I also cannot ignore the very strong voice inside of our ethics meetings every week that this was not good enough. So what we've done is we've been working on the where do those two things intersect? Like if we use carbon as a tool, what do we need to fix? How do we fix it? What are the next right things? And then we kind of broke it down to three major ones. The first issue was community benefit sharing, which is one of the big South Pole failings. They measured about 97% of the margin was lost to intermediaries. And there's a really easy way to shine a nice bright light on distinguishing that project from a good one. Like Madiman paid 90% to communities. They're really happy. And certifiers don't do that. They don't certify revenue share. So we work with World Bank to create a how much money did you actually pay the community third party view? And it's a super simple fix that will solve a lot of problems very fast. That's one example. The other one we did was peer nominated FPIC. Validation. A lot of the FPIC failed because it wasn't Indigenous experts validating an FPIC. It was non-Indigenous people, and you have to be compliant under Indigenous law, and you need Indigenous lawyers, quote unquote, to do that. So we just thought, why don't we just do a pure nominated ranking algorithm, and we presented that to Bid Labs. That's another easy structural solution. So I'm not a big fan of criticism. What do they say in Colombia? He who opposes proposes. So we had some serious critiques of the market structure, and we thought, why don't we come up with some solutions and talk about those? So peer nominated FPIC Capital is a World Bank payment software, and then we also been working really hard on ex post credits and getting it across the line with Cambridge, so that we can maybe solve some of the scientific structural issues that were creating so much trouble. I'm always happy to nerd on solutions if you guys want more details. Oh, I might be missing.
No, I think that was great. There was another one here.
I also
Uh,
sent a question about.
yeah, so Sharon had a question as well, or a comment on regenerative economy.
Oof, yeah, I hear the word regenerative a lot. I try not to use it too much because there's some associations with reinventing money. And one of the things the leader said is let's not get sidetracked with reinventing money right now. Let's stick with whatever money works and whatever zone we're in. And let's stick with, we need to be working on a recuperating ecosystem. So we tend not to use the word regenerative, although there is a trendiness, with things going up and down. We try and stick with like tangible terms like carbon, reforestation, uplift versus conservation, things like that.
Sharon,
Is
your
that
hands
answering
up.
it?
Did you want to come in with a verbal on that?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, the big thing about shifting to a regenerative economy is that you're really shifting the economy. I mean, it goes way beyond money or what kind of currency you're using. It means the system that we have now is very mechanistic. It is based on short term profits. It eats up everything in its path, and it does not value humans or the planet. I mean, trees literally have no standing. You know, shifting to a regenerative economy means shifting to an economy that functions as a living system and therefore allows for things to grow and to die and to be composted and moved into new things, and it actually values people and this planet. And where I'm sitting, we need to really be doing that. Otherwise, I think we're just rearranging the decks on the Titanic.
John Fullerton set out, everybody's using the phrase regenerative. John set out to define what it actually means based on the principles underlying how nature does business, and laid out 8 principles. And in so doing, pulled from a lot of the best work around, including ecological economics, the work of Bob Costanza and others. And it's, when John first presented me with his work back in 2012, uh, I said, wow, in 50 odd years of doing this work, this is the best that I have found. And I said I could argue with this, I could quibble with that, but full stop. His take on then regenerative capitalism, his book now is Regenerative Economics, is the best that I have found. And John says himself, I'm learning. I'm just a student trying to figure all of this out and learning from some of the best folk around. Has been offering a course in what is regenerative economics. And if any of you are trying to figure out what you want to do for your next endeavor, I highly recommend it. Sharon put the course in the chat box.
Yeah, we try not. So Fernando made a rule in our Indigenous Leaders Network at the beginning. He said, no cosmovision. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he says, well, some of you from the star, some of you from the dog, some of you from the river. You're never going to agree. So if you can't agree, don't talk about it. And that was the best decision we ever made. We decided the one thing we could all agree on was rights of nature. So we sat down and we spent a year figuring out what they meant by rights of nature. And right to regenerate is one of the rights that they kind of normalized down to. There was the whole thing about how to translate everything is all one kind of indigenous view to like a more deconstructed, how do we regulate genetically modified organisms in California view? And you guys will see the results on the website. But so we're always trying to get away from any kind of semantics and get down to core principles. And I totally agree. We've taken too much from the planet. We need to restore balance. That's just whatever label you put on it. That's the situation we're in. Whether you say that's planetary boundaries or you say that's regenerative economies, it doesn't really matter. The point is we all know we need to do better. And nature does grow on its own if you leave it alone or if you get it started. So, yeah.
That's a really good point. And it's a good one to sort of start wrapping up on. Do we have more questions, or I'm gonna ask Drea to see if you've got any sort of words of wrap up or things that might bundle all of this together. I think there's some great stuff, or just to reiterate some of the stuff you've been dropping into the chat, I think is would be great.
Well, the Indigenous leaders, I have them uncut. So I am not allowed to speak for them. I am barely a negotiator on a good day. I can't say I am a friend, but I have them uncut in their own words on this website, which is called rightsofnaturenow.com. And you will see their version of here's what you guys need to know. And I strongly recommend you guys go there, end up there. You won't see Savimbo on the website. It's by agreement. We contributed to it, but we are not. It is about the principles, what needs to get done, and how it needs to be said. And it's from authoritative leaders. So I really would encourage you guys to go get the actual word from the source. And then so much fun to play Planet with you guys. I keep saying hashtag solarpunk. Everybody's like, what is that? And I'm like, it's the opposite of a zombie apocalypse. Like, if you didn't know what it was, that's what it is. It's solarpunk. So if you guys ever want some cool solarpunk books or anything, definitely always hit me up. I really think we could figure this out. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think there was hope. And thank you so much, Hunter, for the invite and for this group for the same reasons. We're not going to make it if we don't try.
And that's exactly why COPx exists, is because, I think Hunter sort of described it at the beginning, but I think one of the reasons that I'm here and Environment Next is here is because we've there's so much doom, and I have kids, and I can't accept that there's all we can do is watch it slide. And so we've seen, the failure of the last few years of intergovernmental processes to advance things. We've seen the failure of, public policy on many fronts. And that means that the saving of the world, for lack of a better term, is up to the rest of us. And that there are the private sector writ large, meaning nonprofits, for profits. There's lots of people trying to do things in this section, and also other orders of government. So I think we've got, with COPx, we've got a place to have these conversations, as Hunter said, a bottom up approach instead of the fire fest that was the last COP. And over 3 decades, what do we have to show for this? We do actually have things to show. I mean, there have been, where we would have been absent those international negotiations, is a different place than we are now. But it's still not good enough. It's still not fast enough. And we're going to be going into, we've already got weird weather. We've got, dying biodiversity. It's, even in my lifetime, things have altered for the worse. And so this is where, we can have these conversations. And I think it's been great to have you on, Drea. It's been great to hear from others, and we look forward to further conversations.
Paul, thank you. Thank you so much to all of you who have joined us. If you want to continue to be a part of these conversations, join us in COPx, www.copx.global. This has been recorded. We will take this recording and post it to the site with Drea's permission. And thus, other people can access her wisdom. I do highly recommend that you check out the websites that she has listed. The chat will be saved, and I'll be posting that along with the recording of this so you can get these resources. Sharon, what can we do? We're in a horse race with catastrophe. The good news, we're in the race. We know how to solve all of the problems facing us. Why haven't we? Perhaps, as Paul said, because we've expected that someone else will do it for us. As we enter this realm of true global weirding, in a sense, it's like a friend of mine, Kevin Danaher, said about justice. It's just us. We are the ones who can solve this crisis. And that was the ambassador's wisdom in creating COPx. So I do hope all of you will join us in COPx. If you have suggestions for what you would like to hear in more of these webinars, we will be doing them at least once a month, and hopefully at least several times a month. Check out the COPx website, www.copx.global. And I look forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Thanks.
Thank you, Hunter.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
guys.
Thank you.
Adios
Appreciate it.
all.
Pleasure.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.